For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, who do you trust to take on immigration? Joining me now is Chair of Migrant Watch, Alp Mehmet, former Labour Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane, Conservative Councillor and former Special Advisor to the Home Office for Immigration Minister Claire Pearsall, and Deputy Leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane. I'll start with you, Alp. This immigration bill, the plans that they tried to put forward, what were your thoughts on it?
First of all, Migration Watch, not Migrant Watch, please, Nana.
I think, did I not say that? I thought I said Migration Watch.
No.
I'm not saying Migrant Watch. Sorry.
The bill, I think, is certainly a very important step. There's a lot of flaws. There's a lot yet to be done, which can be rectified as it goes through Parliament. As it is, I think that it probably will get held up in the courts. Whether we like it or not, I'm afraid that the only way that this crisis is going to be solved is if we start returning people who come here illegally. And that would appear is what the bill intends to achieve.
So do you think this is a good step forward then?
I do. And this is the commitment. The commitment for the Home Secretary to be required to return those who arrive illegally, that is significant. And I believe that if they eventually get to actually putting it into practice, then it will have an impact.
Well, Rebecca Jane, what do you think?
Well, there's the problem. I agree with a lot of actually what you've just said, Alp. But unfortunately, I have no trust or faith in the Conservatives, but I wouldn't do given my position. So we've heard a lot of these plans and stunts that they have tried to get through, and they don't, because they are all doomed to fail because of the detail, and they do get held up. You know, we only have to look at the Rwanda plan. We've heard exactly the same speech from Boris Johnson and from Suella Braverman this week, literally the same one as a year ago, saying it's going to fix the problem. It's not, and it's not because the Conservatives don't have a handle on this, they don't know what they're doing, and it's time for a new party to step in with better plans and actually can see them through.
Dennis, you're sort of chucking there.
Well, only the idea that there's a party that has the answer. I started life as a young activist fighting racism late 1960s when Enoch Powell was calling for the repatriation of all the immigrants, including people like Suella Braverman's parents or Rishi Sunak's parents. That was his big idea.
Well, what's that got to do with it, Dennis?
Very simply, that each succeeding decade, and Alp's an old friend, we worked together in the Foreign Office when he was a distinguished ambassador, I was the minister. Each decade, each government tries to do something, but when you get surges of people impelled to move, and the idea of, Emmanuel Macron's laughing all the way to the bank. The British taxpayers just given him nearly £500 million to play with. And they're not going to stop a single Zodiac little dinghy when the warm weather comes, filling up with these people on a 100-mile coastline and trying to get to Britain.
Do you think? Claire Pearsall?
Funnily enough, I actually agree with some of what Dennis was saying, and I do think this is perhaps a failure of successive governments and each party which has their own distinct idea of what the migration problem is. But I do think the Conservative Party have now made some real strides to look at how you solve that. And yes, we have just given a very large amount of money over to Emmanuel Macron, who is going to be incredibly happy with his own performance. But it is going to be essential to have his help going forward with the EU Commission when we look to set up these returns deals with the rest of the EU. So I do think that some investment, unfortunately, is needed. It is a large amount, and let's hope it brings results.
But you know, Rebecca Jane points out that we've heard this time and time again, and to be fair, I am with her in many respects that we have. What makes this one different, Claire?
I don't disagree with you in that respect. I really don't. And you and I have spoken previously on immigration, where I have been really quite against what the Conservative government is doing. However, when you start looking at what all the other parties have to offer, it really is incredibly little. The Labour Party is so tied up with trying to make sure that they have a go at the Conservative government without coming forward with any policies other than beefing up the National Crime Agency. The Lib Dems, similarly, seem seem to want to just be fair to everybody, which in immigration terms you can never be. And then you look at the Greens, who would basically allow anyone to be here if there's an ecological disaster. And if they've been here for 5 years illegally, well, they'll just stay. So at the very least, the Conservatives are coming up with some plans where other parties are failing to do so.
Sorry, Nana, can I come
Yeah,
in
I
on
was about to ask you.
Can I just refocus this debate on what it is that we're talking about? The bill is intended to deal with the crisis that we now have in the Channel. That is what we are debating at the moment. How do you stop those boats? How do you stop people from jumping into flimsy dinghies and risking their lives and making their way over here? That's what we're talking about. There's all sorts of things to debate about wider issues involving migration. But on this particular point, how do we stop it? And the only way we're going to stop it is to show that if you jump into a dinghy, get across here, it's not going to work, you're not going to stay. Then they will stop trying to get here by whatever means they can.
Well, you're right there, but the discussion is actually who do you trust with the whole idea of this policy? So whilst that is the consideration, Alp, do you trust the Conservative Party on this particular issue?
Well,
do you trust them more than Labour? Would you trust a Labour government to do it?
To be honest, I don't think that any of the parties, certainly the main parties, both Conservatives and Labour, have covered themselves in glory in dealing with this issue over the years. And that goes to illegal immigration is nothing new. What is new is them jumping into boats and coming across. The Tories, I think they've failed, partly because they didn't really make the effort that was necessary when it all started 4 or 5 years ago. They are now. There's an election coming up, dare I say, so they know that they've got to get it right. With regard to the bill, it won't do the job, and it will be a while before it's implemented. However, there are all sorts of gaps and loopholes in it at the moment, and those need to be addressed as well if it's going to have any effect.
Isn't the problem, Nana, that for the last 3 years, 4 years, all we've had from Boris Johnson and Suella Braverman is non-stop insults to the French. Donny Nouveau-Brake, Liz Truss, Macron, the jury's out on him. Really offensive, insulting language, which I know from all my friends in France, it upsets them. You don't talk to mature countries.
No, it works both ways, Dennis. Are you saying that the French haven't been? They've been pretty hostile towards the British as well.
They can be. They didn't like, for example,
they didn't like Brexit.
They didn't. I didn't give a toss about Brexit.
They didn't like Brexit.
They didn't like, for example, us invading Afghanistan and Iraq. And we wouldn't have all the Afghans.
Well, that was done well before a few years ago.
But they didn't attack Blair. Johnson went out of his way to be rude, patronising, sneering, dismissive of Macron and the French, as did other ministers and the press.
I don't think you can say that. I don't think that's necessarily fair. They weren't happy with Brexit.
If you don't, for heaven's sake.
They weren't happy with it.
Do you not... Now, let me tell you, in the rest of Europe, Brexit is seen as something that's brought the rest of Europe together. All the anti-Europeans, like Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini, they've dropped their anti-European discourse from their point of view. But you don't want to
What are you talking about? What are you talking about? That's not true. Look at what's happened in Italy. People are actually going... If anything, Europe has become more to the right since Brexit, I would say.
But Giorgia Meloni's dropped all her anti-EU, anti-Euro lines.
OK, let's stick to the subject
She's being allowed to push...
OK, so Dennis.
Sorry.
So do you trust the Labour Party then with immigration and the policy? That's what the question is. Do you trust them? Who do you trust?
I don't see clear evidence from the Labour Party, except it is willing to engage more broadly with Europe, not to go back to the EU.
All right, that's enough. That's enough. So I can't take any more. No, I've heard enough. Enough. You had enough. I've had enough.
All right, keep the problem going, Dan.
The Labour Party's policies and proposals for policies on the Channel, frankly, don't add up. What they're saying is we'll deal with the traffickers and we'll deal with the gangs. Well, that's happening anyway, and we are working with the French and others to address that particular point. The other thing they're saying is, well, what we've got to do is reduce the backlog. Neither of those points really will make the blindest bit of difference to the numbers who are coming over.
I had thousands of asylum cases when I was an MP, and none of them were treated. Patrick Chisty, a very distinguished GB News presenter, did a great film.
Patrick Chisty?
He's not, all right.
Patrick Christie.
Forgive me.
Chisty.
He did a great report
No, I
from
can't take
somewhere
anymore.
near Marlow, and he found an Eritrean colonel who fled for his life, because otherwise he's going to be killed and tortured, landed here in 2015, and last November, whenever it was, his case still hadn't been heard. So,
Well, Claire, I'm going to come to Claire.
We need
Claire.
more officials to deal with this quickly.
Claire,
You need to deal with it,
Claire,
not
do you
more
think that the
officials.
Conservative Party then, do you think they're going to be able to pull it off? Do you think the Conservative Party will be able to pull it off? Because I think if they solve immigration, they could actually potentially win the election. Do you think they can pull it off?
I mean, I agree with you. If they can manage to pull this off, then they absolutely will save the next election. But it is going to get held up by the courts. It's got to get through the Commons and the Lords yet. So there hopefully will be some good amendments being made. But fingers crossed, I think this is probably more positive than we've seen over the last 18 months.
Rebecca Jane, you also, do you think they can pull it off? We've only got about 10 seconds, so we'll have to... Rebecca Jane.
I'm just infuriated by the whole thing. You can't trust any of them. Nobody's got a decent plan. It's not going to go through. We're all wishful thinking, and it's not going to happen.
I don't know. Alp Mehmet, 10 seconds.
It's probably not going to happen anytime soon. I don't think any of the parties at the moment have shown that they're up to it. The Tories have made a useful start this time.
Dennis, you've had enough.
Simply this time next year, bring us back, and if no more boats have crossed the channel, I'll buy Alp and everybody the biggest drink in the world, but it's not going to reduce it. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll hold you to that, Dennis McShane. Thank you very much. Claire Pearson, Conservative Councillor and former Special Advisor. Rebecca Jane, Deputy Leader of UKIP. And Alp Mehmet, Chair for Migration Watch.